On episode 147, I'm delighted to be joined by former League of Ireland manager, UEFA Pro licensed coach and current head of games at Laois GAA, Shane Keegan. This episode was recorded during the 2023 League of Ireland season while Shane was still coaching at Cobh Ramblers. He has since stepped away with this role to focus on his full-time position. Shane is a fountain of knowledge and I thoroughly enjoyed chatting with him, so I hope you get something from the episode. Okay, great to be joined by Shane Keegan. Shane, thanks a million for your time and for joining the podcast today.
No problem at all, Orla. Delighted to be on.
Before we get into everything, I do like to give a bit of an intro to the listeners. So for the listeners who don't know who you are, I have a lot of people maybe in the basketball world that might not have come across you before, but would you mind giving your elevator pitch to those who might not know who you are, Shane?
Jesus. My elevator pitch is a bit longer maybe than some. It's a bit of a complicated background. A finger in every pie, as they say. I suppose background predominantly up until recent years was football, or soccer nearly to call it, to separate it from Gaelic football. I would have started the coaching route in that sense very, very young. Started my coaching badges in my late teens, and got my first role as a manager in the League of Ireland in 2012. 2012. And have been involved in the League of Ireland since then. But strangely enough, my current day job is I am the county head of games for Laois GAA. So the GAA has always been a big part of things over that period, even during the all through my soccer career. The GAA was very prominent in the background as well, and it's kind of gone from the background to the foreground in the last couple of years. So it's been interesting.
Okay, very good. Who had the biggest impact on you growing up coaching? Was it always something you thought you'd go down, or was there a particular coach that you kind of attribute your interest in it for?
I would say I was barely above average as a player, or the average is probably actually a decent assessment. But I would have managed at the same time to predominantly be captain of a lot of teams I would have been on, because I was maybe a good talker or a good organiser. I was better with my mouth than I was with my feet, if that makes sense. And I literally would have went straight from my final year playing youth soccer to the following season managing our youth team. So I would have been managing the same team I was playing on just 12 months later. So it was definitely something that I was kind of always veering towards. I suppose the biggest early impact on me is a guy, I don't know if you've had many football guests on, but I'd be surprised if they didn't all reference this man, Noel O'Reilly, who would have been Brian Kerr's right hand man back when Brian had the successful Irish underage international sides that went very well. First ever coaching course I ever did, Noel delivered it, and I came away from the coaching course basically saying to myself that's what I want now. That's what I want. I want to be. I had probably looked at coaching as just a pastime up to that point, but Noel had such an impact on me in those first couple of courses that I kind of decided very early on, I want to go after this. This is something I want to be more than just a hobby in the background.
Wow, does he know the impact you've had on him as a coach?
Look, I'd be stunned if I'm one of literally hundreds, I would say, who would throw exactly that line at you, Orla. There's the FAI award, a grassroots coach award every year now that's called the Noel O'Reilly Award, and you will hear people everywhere referencing him. I remember we did the first engagement. I think it was on maybe the Kickstart 2, which is in my very early years. I remember we did the first engagement before the summer, and we had the second engagement after the summer. And the Kennedy Cup, which would be a big underage soccer tournament, was on in between the first and second engagement. And I remember when we came back from the second engagement, he was starting off the course, and he said something along the lines of, I was at the Kennedy Cup this year and I saw one man in this room in action, and he said, I just would like to draw attention and give him a bit of praise for the way he interacted with the kids and blah blah blah. And as he was talking, I started to kind of go, fuck, I think this is me. Kind of a thing, and he gets to the end of it then, and he did point at me, just said, Shane, listen, very well done, and all that kind of crack. So yeah, I approached him after that. I was actually living in Dublin at the time, where Noel was based. I approached Noel after it and says, listen, Noel, is there anywhere I can come and watch a coach that I can, just stand in the background, take a few notes and the whole lot? And he said he was working with a DDSL under 15 or under 16 team at the time, I think it was. up in the AUL every Monday night, and he said, come on, he says, but if you're coming, he says, be prepared to jump in and get your boots on and the whole lot. So shortly after that course finished, I would have been in the AUL, literally picking up cones, throwing down cones, kind of run around whatever Noel wanted me to do for maybe a month or two every Monday night. So that was a absolutely tremendous learning curve for me as well, you know.
Wow. I'm going to ask you 2 questions from that. What did he praise you on, and what did you pick up from him when you ended up not only seeing him in the coaching course, but then seeing him put it to use and put it in practice with that underage team?
Yeah, look, I think the answer to both questions is probably in the one, in that he probably praised me more so for the human connection skills than he did for any particular. I mean, all I was doing at the County Cup, essentially, really, I was the assistant manager. All I was doing essentially was running warm-ups, you know, so I wasn't exactly going to blow his mind with how the standard of my warm-up, but it was just how you connect with the young lads and how the young lads respond to you, and I suppose the way you talk to them during the game, trying to get that balance right between giving information while not overburdening them with information. Now, I certainly hadn't got that right at that stage either, so I don't know if that would have fed into it. But yeah, when you go out and watch him coach, and then again it's the same, you know, not to play him down, it's not that he put on training practices or drills that I'd never seen before. It was just the fact that he had every young fella on the pitch eating out of the palm of his hand. You know, he literally eating out of the palm of his hand. He just had them all, a hold on them all, because he was just brilliant at building connections. I remember, to go back to the actual course itself, for one part of the course, they wanted young players to come in and be the players on the course, if that makes sense. I'm from a small little town in Laois called Rathdowney, and a friend of mine from Rathdowney was doing the course with me, and I was still very young at the time, but he'd be a good bit older than me, so he brought his son as one of the players, and so he participated in Noel's coaching during the coaching award, if that makes sense. And even just being in the car with him driving home, hearing him talk about how it felt to be coached by Noel, and Dad, did you see when he pulled me over and said I was brilliant at this and this, but that I needed to work on my left foot a little bit more, and like the impact he had on young Shane that day, which, look, you're just driving home going, Jesus, that's the impact I want to have on people going forward, you know.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple of times human connection, and whether it was yourself or Noel. How do you connect with a player? You know, it's an interesting question when you're. I find, because I'm a female, so I coach female players, and you're a man, obviously, you coach men. And has it ever crossed over? Have you ever tried to coach females before? How do you get that human connection bit? Maybe gender isn't even a factor, but what do you think?
Yeah, really the only crossover I would have had, to be honest with you, is at the very, very young age levels. Before I went into this current role, I would have been a GPO for about 15, 16 months. So you've been doing a huge amount of primary school coaching during that period. So we'd have as many girls involved in those classes as we would have boys, and I don't think there was any difference, certainly in the way I went about it. I found it as easy or as difficult, either way, whichever way you want to look at it, to build a connection with the girls as you would with the boys. And look, again, I know it's you're wary of kind of veering into cliche territory, but just showing that you like knowing their name. I know, again, it sounds like the most. And listen, to me, for the first month of a new class, everybody is, well, bud, or how you miss, or that kind of thing, because you don't know the name, but again, they think you know the name if you're saying, well, buddy, or how you miss, or that kind of crack. And even they think they know who they are, whereas you probably don't. You're still trying to figure all of that out. But yeah, just talking to everybody on their level, really, Orla. That's all it is. I would kind of, pride myself on being able to talk to a 5 or 6 year old in the manner that a 5 or 6 year old likes to be talked to, and then speak to some of the players in my current Cobh Ramblers dressing room as a 29 or 30 year old expects to be spoken to, and all in between those two age brackets.
Because it's interesting when you mentioned you were maybe an average player, but you found yourself in these captaincy roles, and now your ability to connect. Where do you think that comes from? I would get the sense that it's both a very similar scale that the coaches saw in you and now you use in your coaching. Where do you think that comes from? Is it from your upbringing? Is it from the coaches you've seen? Where does that come from, do you think? Yeah,
look, I think both my parents in very different ways are probably people persons, if that makes sense. Like Dad would be a very well known face around home. would have been involved in the music scene, would have been massively involved in the sports scene, would have been the town postman, all those kind of things. Everybody knows him, and he is the sort of fella that would chat away with everybody. The leadership side of thing probably comes from Mam a bit more. Mam is as CEO in a quite a prominent company, and has been in leadership roles kind of since her probably late 20s, and I would say maybe some of those traits came from that side. I also spent 20 years in sales, so sport has only been my full-time employment probably in the last 5 or 6 years or so. Up to that I was in sales all my life, and you'd certainly get a great grounding in sales in terms of being able to talk to everybody at their level, being able to strike a chord with them and find common ground with everybody, because they do say people don't buy products, people buy people, and that would have been kind of the sales training I would have always got. I went in sales very, very early, 18, 19 years of age again, so I think I started out in Suits U in the Rathdowney, the failed Rathdowney designer outlet here in Laois, and they had like what they called their 10 golden rules, that literally when you signed on the dotted line, was part of your contract. If you broke any of their 10 golden rules, they could be pretty much let go on the spot. Some of those 10 golden rules literally apply to how I go about sports management to this day, really. So that probably helped as well.
Okay, very interesting. Do you remember the 10 golden rules?
Oh Jesus, I'd say I don't know them all off, and some were maybe suit related, all right. But again, there was certainly things around the idea of within, I think it was like within the first minute of somebody coming into the shop, there was very kind of clear criteria about how you had to introduce yourself to that person, and it was about striking the right balance between, if anybody got in and out of the shop without being greeted, that was a sackable offence for a start. But you also had to make sure that it wasn't a case of, oh, here I am and I'm going to try and squeeze every penny out of you. They gave you particular tips as to how to say hello, how to maybe, extract a little bit of information from them as to, why are they here today, what might they need their suit for, and while hopefully having that conversation in an informal way, kind of almost guiding them towards the section where their appropriate size was. And hopefully within the first 2-3 minutes of meeting this person, you actually knew a hell of a lot about them before you kind of walked away and left them to browse, and left them in a scenario where they genuinely would call you back for a little bit more information after you gave them a chance to have a little bit of a browse in their correct area. But again, one of the big things they would have said, Orla, was suits are interesting in that one person could walk in to buy a suit because they're up in court later that day, unfortunately, for might be a driving charge or something like that, and you have to be able to connect with that person and sell them a suit, and 10 minutes later the judge who's sitting in the seat in front of them and going to be assessing, whether they're going to be in trouble or not, he probably needs a suit as well, and he's quite possibly going to come in, and you now need to be able to speak to that man on that man's level and be able to have a conversation with him at a standard that he's comfortable with. So again, it's just the kind of, the two ends of the spectrum and everybody in between,
Mm-hmm. That's a perfect segue for my next question. It was going to be, how do you start and how do you connect with individuals when you start with a new team? Let's say you go into, take Cobh for example. How did you start with them? How did you connect with the players on an individual level?
Yeah, I think first thing, obviously the difference between the GAA and soccer is in soccer we can obviously recruit. So therefore you'd actually do a massive amount of background already before you would recruit, and I'll maybe touch on that a little bit more there. I see some of the questions for later on. I'll touch on that a little bit more in terms of where you can go wrong in that sense. But yeah, I would go out of my way to try and speak to as many people who've had interaction with that player, be they fellow players or be they former managers or that kind of thing, and find out a bit about him. Look, let's be honest, probably doing a little bit of social media snooping as well to see what you can find out from the Facebook profile or the Twitter or the LinkedIn or whatever it is, and just try and get an idea of what possible common ground you could have with them. Look, I would like to think I have a fairly wide variety of interests myself, so therefore I would think there's some common ground almost that can be found with everybody, and that you use that as your connection, that as your way in. But from there, then there has to be a genuineness about you in how you deal with them, that balance between being open to them and being encouraging with them, while also not filling them with shit, for want of a better way of putting it. That's maybe one that I wouldn't say I've maybe fully nailed. I think I'm probably better at the arm around the shoulder than I am with the use of the stick yet, and I probably need to try and improve in that area a little bit more. But yeah, it's as I say, it's just trying to find a common area and have a genuineness of communication. The difficulty you're going to have is not everybody may be genuine with your back. You know, a lot of people will tell you what they want to hear, but their actions may be very, very different to their words. And maybe I've been guilty myself at times of my actions being different to my words. I would say certainly if you spoke to some former players, they would probably point out a couple of areas where maybe my own actions were difficult to my words, because it is very hard to live up to your words all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And when it's interesting on that point you made about soccer versus GAA, when you are recruiting players, aside from their physical ability on the pitch, and obviously that's going to be a major factor, what are the other qualities that you look for in players that you want to coach or recruit for your team?
Probably, arguably my favourite word in the English language, Orla, is consistency. You know, I would have a large element of OCD to me, I suppose, and I like structure, I like organisation, and I like consistency, and I like probably giving a practical example is probably the best way, and I've given this practical example once or twice before with people I've spoken to. Like over the last 15 years or that, I would have encountered an awful lot of people in different sports, and some absolutely tremendous people, but there's one, we had a player at Dundalk called John Mountney, and look, hopefully he won't hear this now, because I don't want to embarrass him or anything, right? But John Mountney is probably be close call probably between himself and a guy I had at Galway, Colm Horgan, but I'd probably go with Mounts just about in terms of the most solid individual I've ever encountered. And the reason I say it is, I suppose, if John Mountney started on Friday night, or John Mountney didn't start on Friday night, you'd meet the same fella on Saturday. 100%er, a fella who's going to put absolutely everything in the, well, let's say the next training session. Let's say we jump forward to the Sunday. John Mountney, the session you'll get out, the person you'll meet walking in, and the session you will get out of John Mountney will be identical, regardless of whether he started on Friday night or was a sub on Friday night, regardless of whether the team won on Friday night or lost on Friday night, regardless of whether the team is going well or going poorly. I mean, you do a huge amount of background checks, Orla, and where I would have slipped up early on is you ring a couple of managers or a couple of players and you ask about a specific individual and you get glowing reference, and then you find out that you realise the mistake you made was that all the people that you spoke to were only ever around that person during good times, and you actually have no idea how that person reacts during bad times. You haven't gone and found a manager who he played for when they got relegated, or when he was out in the starting 11, or, you know, people behave, by and large, the vast majority of people behave differently based on the circumstances of what's going on around them at the time. John Mountney never behaved differently. Never behaved differently, Orla. I swear to God, it was amazing. And I suppose the reason that you'd hold it up even higher as a perfect example is because of the quality in that Dundalk side. He actually was out of the team more often than he was in the team. I was lucky that my very first interaction with Dundalk was when they brought me on board. I initially went in there as opposition analyst. It was a trip to Portugal for a pre-season block of work, and the manager traditionally gives a bit of a talk towards the end of the week of the aims and aspirations for the season, and without giving away confidence or anything, like one of the questions that he would have thrown out, he would have just opened it to the floor, I suppose. Has anybody got any comments to make? And a couple of different people would have stood up and made a couple of different comments. And again, Mounts would have stood up that day. And as I say, I'd only met him maybe 48 hours previous, but I was struck by the fact that he stood up that day. And things hadn't gone as well the previous season for Dundalk as they had prior to that. And Mounts stood up and said that he felt one of the key areas they had dropped off in, it's the old Kilkenny hurling thing, I suppose, one of the key areas they dropped off in was the standard of the squad that the last in-house training session on the Thursday, the half an hour game that they played on the Thursday, he said was always tougher than anything they would face on Friday night, because everybody gave 100% and everybody put it in, and the A team came up against the B team, and because the B team applied themselves right, the A team knew coming off the field, if we bet our B team today, we're capable of beating anybody tomorrow night. And Mounts made the point that he felt that had dropped off a bit in the previous 6 months. He felt that all of a sudden, if the B team was the green bibs, that fellas who were being handed a green bib were sulking a bit, were maybe down in tools a little bit, maybe weren't putting in the correct level of application to really, really test the A team in that final training session. And again, the reason that carried such weight, Orla, and the reason it made such impact is Mounts would have been on the green bib team. Do you know what I mean? This wasn't a fella who was on the starting team and who was saying, all the rest of ye are not putting in the effort, we need you to put in more effort. This was a fellow who was actually on the green bib team, and therefore, if he's saying it carries far more weight.
Wow, that's class. And that's actually something that's come back to. I'm remembering whether it's reading articles or books about the Dublin team, Andy Moran talking about Mayo, like his book, he just gave, he attributed their success to the lads that we didn't know about. Like, we knew their name, but he said the effect that they had in the dressing room. How do you teach that? Or is it something that players have or within themselves, whether it's their personality or their own upbringing at home? Or is it something that you can instill in a player?
Well, it's gas. Mounts is a Mayo man, so I don't know. Is it just in the water? Is it just in the water over there? Or quite possibly. Yeah, I don't know. I've never met Mounts' mum or dad. I often joked. I said the other close call was probably Colin Horgan. Like, the Horgans had I think four of them now have played either semi-professional or professional football. Darryl obviously represented his country at the highest level, a full Irish international. And again, tremendously solid characters. I don't know. Listen, if I knew. I've got an 8-year-old at home, Orla, so I'm trying to learn all this as I'm going. So I am. How do I make sure that Conor turns out like John Mountney? That's essentially what I'm trying to do, if I'm completely honest. And I don't know. It's a fine balance again, isn't it, between trying to offer the encouragement, trying to have the arm around the shoulder, while at the same time I think another key phrase is just how do you go about giving your child that resilience? How do you go about giving your child that resilience, that they are able to take the knockbacks, that they are able to move on? Best way for me, I'm always trying to think of practical examples. There's a young player in the League of Ireland at the moment who unfortunately is suffering incredible setback. Colin Whelan, who is now at Derry City, was incredible for UCD over the last few years and capped at Irish under-21 level. He's now gone through his second cruciate. I think it's his cruciate, but he's had a reoccurrence of a really bad injury anyway. I know Colin reasonably well, but I actually would have known his older brother even better. Barry would have been on my underage Kilkenny soccer teams when I was kind of coming through, and I always think to myself, Jesus, Colin is going through a tough time at the moment. By God, has he got a right good one in his corner, because Barry and Colin's dad, PJ, is another one who just, there are parents that you encounter on your way along that you go, yeah, they've got a bloody nail. If I can parent half as well as they parent. And PJ's thing with Barry used to always be, if there's a trial process on, Barry would have been maybe in and around Irish international trials himself, probably didn't never have, Colin's level of ability, but would have been in and around Irish international trial processes as well. And, his whole thing with Barry was, right, let's go for this, let's give it 100%. Let's do everything we can to try and make it. But if we don't make it, that's grand. That's fine. So what? Let's move on. Next project. In fact, that was a phrase he always used. Next project. Okay, we gave that everything, and it either has worked out or it hasn't worked out. But whether it's worked out or not worked out, next project now. What's the next thing we're going to go after and try and give 100% to,
Brilliant. That's brilliant. And that's actually something I've been kind of talking to other coaches about, maybe not on the public platform, but in terms of parents, what's been like that approach there is brilliant. Are there any other really good approaches you've seen? I don't want to talk about the bad approaches, we know what they're like, but I'm always interested in sharing a good approach, and from a good parent at home can have a massive impact on a player. What are the other trends or styles like that, what that next project is that you've seen that have worked really well? Is there anything that kind of stands out?
Well, I don't know. Have you seen Evan Ferguson's interview after the hat-trick for Brighton?
Yeah.
I mean, look, that I have said already elsewhere that I think that needs to be played as a national broadcast to the parents of Ireland. I really, really do. And yeah, I actually wrote an article before. I used to write a weekly column for the Times, and I remember writing an article about again, hopefully people won't mind me using names, but there's a cracking young player at St. Pat's called Ben McCormick, and his dad would have played League of Ireland as well. But I have a younger brother. I have a brother who's 20 years younger than me, and he's 20 now. So say 7-8 years ago, thereabouts, he was showing a good bit of promise as a goalkeeper. So Dad actually took him up to, as he kind of had to do back then, which thankfully you don't have to do anymore. You kind of had to go to Dublin, even up to 8-9 years ago, if you really wanted to make an impression. So my brother would have signed with Belvedere up in Dublin, and at the time I would have been managing in the League of Ireland, and it was amazing, Orla, because people would have heard that James's brother was Shane Keegan, who's managing in the League of Ireland. An awful lot of parents went out of their way to introduce themselves to you and to try and buy you a cup of tea and, want to talk to you about your League of Ireland and the best pathway for their sons and all this kind of crack. And this was going on for a couple of weeks up there, because I would have gone up to most of James's matches up there, and would have been going on for a couple of weeks up there. And over a couple of weeks, one player just kept standing out every week, and by kind of week 4 or week 5, I turned around to Dad and I said, "Who's the number 8?" And he says, "That's Ben McCormick." And I said, and looked to my right and kind of where all the gaggle of parents were, and I said, which of those is Ben's? Most of them have told me who their kid is and none of them have ever pointed to Ben as being their kid. And Dad says, "No, you're looking the wrong direction." He says, "Look left and look down towards the corner flag, the man standing down at the corner flag on his own." And it's exactly what Evan said about his dad. I looked down and saw this man standing on his own, just watching the game on his own. And what was so impressive, Orla, was I think there was a particular game I referenced where there was a tough game, even at under 12 level, a tough game. I think Ben scored twice, but then scored 2 crackers, then missed a sitter for his hat-trick, which ended up being right at the death, and if he'd scored it, they would have won the game. They ended up drawing the game instead. He also shipped a lot of heavy tackles because the opposition knew he was the star man, and I don't know how he did it, Orla, but I swear to God, his dad's body language never flinched once. Not once. Not did he jump up or punch the air when Ben scored a cracker. Not did he bury his head in his hands when Ben missed a sitter. Not did he want to run onto the field and check if Ben was all right after he got clattered with a heavy tackle. His body language never changed. Never changed the whole way through. And by this stage, I got to know him a little bit. This was maybe a month further down the line, and I purposely got to as close to him as I could towards the end of the game without actually being on top of him. And yeah, as the game finished, Ben came across, I suppose as young fellas do, what's Dad going to say? Is he going to, looking for approval maybe? And literally all Derek said was, "Well done, Ben. That was a tough game, wasn't it? Did you enjoy it? Come on, let's go." And there was no Spanish Inquisition in relation to, it was literally that. It was literally, that was a tough game, wasn't it? Did you enjoy it? You did well? Yeah, come on, let's go. I just, again, you're essentially trying to learn parenting lessons as best as you can from people like that,
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And I love as well the way that he never changed, positive or negative, even with a goal. There's nothing, and then you never have, because you see some players and you see them kind of, the head is turning, the eyes are going, and they're not looking at you as the coach, they're looking at somebody else. And I think that is sometimes, and you're not going to overstep your mark, but sometimes that's the biggest barrier to players succeeding, is looking for that affirmation, or looking for, there's stuff I've heard, and thankfully it's never been with a player I've coached, but a parent I've heard of in another sport actually would have give their child, that they would have given them money if they scored. And I was like, what is that teaching that kid? I don't know where the logic comes in. I don't know. Maybe I don't understand.
I'll hold my hand up a little bit here, but I'd like to think that mine was a little bit more productive. I remember towards the end of Connor is under 9 GAA games this year, but last year he was still under 7 GAA games, and they had we had kind of brought in a rule by that stage that first half would be ground hurling only, and second half we would allow rising. But Connor's quite fast and knacky, Orla, and I suppose balls would be coming to him in the second half, and because he'd have a little bit of speed in him, he used to just kind of knock it on ahead of him on the ground and knock it on ahead of him on the ground again, and then strike, and might get a goal out of it. And I was kind of trying to say to him, I know that's great now, Connor, but if they're letting you have a go at rising, can we have a go at rising? Because you're going to need to be able to do that next year. And the argument, obviously the logical argument I was getting back is, but why? Why would I try and rise it when what I'm doing is working? And I couldn't get the message to hit home. So eventually I did actually resort to, I'll tell you what, if you have a go at rising and have a couple of successful rises, we'll pick up a packet of Panini match cards on the way home. So I'm guilty there myself.
Yeah. But it's interesting. It's like, how do you balance giving encouragement and instruction and rewarding a player without, like, I was asking the player, coach the other week, it's like, how do you balance confidence and arrogance within a player? Like, how do you instill this? And he had a great answer for it, and I won't tell you because I don't want to influence your own answer. But I want to ask, like, how do you encourage and reward yet still leave? How do you give feedback? Is actually what I'm looking for, positive and negative to a player.
Yeah. Again, it's a tough one. Look, and again, it is, let's be honest, it is easier to give the positive feedback. Of course it is easier to give the positive feedback. I'm jumping to adults here now again and saying in my current role, there's nothing better than meeting a fella at his next training session after he's had a really good game and saying, come here to me, listen, you were excellent Friday night, and I'll tell you why you were excellent. You did this well, you did that well, you did this well. That's an easy enough conversation for any of us to have, really. So it is. The harder one, and again, it's probably one that I would feel that I personally need to improve on, is that one where you do pull them and you do say, I'm thinking of one in particular. Again, it's not easy to do. It's easier to do with the ones that you know will respond in the right way. It's very difficult to do with the ones that you know are immediately going to be confrontational and just, I'd love to say that everybody is open to, effective kind of feedback, but let's be honest, like, none of us like taking it at the same time. Like, you can say you want open and honest feedback, but when it actually comes, you're probably think the person who's delivering it to you is a bit of a bollocks, so yeah, no, look, I did have a conversation with a player last week where I just pulled him at the end. Now again, the reason I probably found it easy to have the conversation was I was telling him that I felt his normal level had dropped off a bit in the last 3 or 4 games, and here were the things that he maybe wasn't doing quite as well, that I needed him to try to get back to a high standard on it. But again, Orla, the reason I probably found it easier to have that conversation was I was finishing that conversation with him by saying, listen, you'd probably agree we're probably within our rights maybe to leave you out this Friday night, but we're not. We're sticking with you, and I want you to try and do all you can to get back to that level. So again, I was capable of having that conversation because I knew I was finishing it on a positive. If I was finishing that conversation by telling them, and listen, we are going to leave you out Wednesday night, I maybe wouldn't have been as good at delivering the news then,
No, yeah, exactly. And that's actually something I probably struggle with as well, is kind of having that negative is not what I'm trying to say, but when you're having to give feedback that isn't as normally positive. Like, I love using an approach. I think you met Derek that day, met you in down at the Leinster course, and I always was taught in the GAA courses to do a sandwich. So something you did well, something you need to improve, but something you did well. And he just had different approaches, 2 stars and a wish. So you did this well, you did this well. I just wish next time you could do this. I don't know why that stuck with me for some reason. Good. But is there any other ways you've seen it? Like, I own a masking because I'm working with teenagers, so it's like I can't, give it to them straight just yet, maybe. But is there any other techniques you've heard of that you found useful in that sense?
Yeah, and I probably do have to go to, like, the 2 things I'd say on this, Orly, is so there's a massive difference between adults and kids, right? Because the difference is with adults now, and look, there's so many positives to the fact that players are better educated and more inquisitive than they were years ago. But one of the other sides to all that, Orly, is, like, almost everybody in my dressing room will have heard of a shit sandwich. So it kind of loses impact if they all know what you're doing. And like, I will go to a player at times and say, listen, come here for a chat, and halfway through some positive feedback, they'll go, listen, I don't be filling me with shit. I know what you're trying to do here. Just shove that to one side and say the bit you actually want to say, will ya? Like, that's how they now respond to it, because they know what you're doing. So that's probably the challenge there. But in terms of kids, look, again, like, probably the most practical example is my own. I would say to Connor, we would talk a lot. I'm the one sport that I really lack knowledge on is rugby, and yet I'm an awful man. I have stolen the work-ons phrase, and again, if I spoke about work-ons to adults, they'd kill me. But with Conor, I would say, listen, where's our toolkit at the moment? What are we good at? What have we got in the toolbox at the moment? We've got this. Your dribbling is excellent if it's soccer. Your striking or your rising is excellent if it's hurling. Your hand passing is excellent if it's Gaelic football, whatever. Okay, what have we not got in the toolkit at the moment, Conor? What are the bits we could look to try and add to the toolkit over the next 2-3 months? And then we'll talk about, okay, yeah, probably, yeah, I'm not great at that yet. Maybe that's what we'll try and put a little bit more emphasis on trying to do in training and trying to do on Go Games match day. And yeah, just trying to expand. And that's one I robbed from a previous father, to be honest with you. Just trying to, how can we expand our toolkit? What tools have we got in our toolkit, and how can we put another tool into the toolkit?
Yeah, brilliant. I love using a practical example. I remember it's only the other day I had a player and I gave her a practical example of a player and something they did, and I said, do you do that? Did Dermot Connolly ever run into a player and solo in front of them? And she was like, no. He used his solo. He got by his player and used his solo to get by him. And she was able to say, right, yeah. Which I could see her in the game implement it straight away. And she never ran into that person to solo again. She always, and I could see her, there was about 3 times where she nearly did. She kind of the hands are out, the foot is going, and then she'd keep running. And that was the first time, and I've used practical examples before, and that just really stuck with me. But it goes back to what I'm going to take from you now is that toolkit of having let's say for example, an ideal corner forward, and it's like, right, what you have and what you don't have and what you're going to need to work on. Where are we? And I love that, just that practical example again, that imagery with the toolkit.
Yeah, and even on that, Orla, like you've got essentially what you're talking about there as well with Connolly is role modelling, and what I'd say on the role modelling is try and tier the role modelling. So I did a presentation to our 16s footballers here, our Laois development squad 16s here last week, and when I spoke about role modelling, what I said was, right, if you're a forward in Gaelic football, right, let's think, right, who's the next level up from where you are at the moment. So maybe have a look and see who's playing your position for your senior club side at the moment. Okay, what are they able to do that you're not able to do at the moment? Why are they a starter for your senior club side at the moment? What are they good at? Okay, how are you going to go about getting good at the things they're good at? Right, okay, now 4 years down the line, you've reached that. Now let's look to the next level, okay? So now who's playing in that position and who's wearing the county jersey? What are they good at? Why are they getting a start there? And what can you do to get to their level? Then when you reach that level, okay, now we can start looking at, well, what is David Clifford doing? And why is David Clifford able to do these things? But I think sometimes we turn around to a 15-year-old, a 16-year-old and tell them, have a look at David Clifford. See what he's doing. That'll tell you what you need to do. Whoa, hold on here. Let's build it up here. Let's layer it up a little bit rather than trying to jump from the young fella, still in his infancy and his learning curve, really, to wanting him to watch David Clifford and try and replicate the things David Clifford is doing.
Yeah, you start to see lads trying to kick points in the 45 or something. And that's actually, it's interesting when you've coached for so long, and people talk about, I remember vividly Niall Morna presenting at a coaching conference, and it was picture of kids outside maybe 20 or 30 years ago compared to now, and it's like parents dragging in the kids, and now it's parents dragging out the kids outside. What are the cultural differences you see now with kids coming up, whether it's at underage into adult, or coaching them at underage, or having them both in a dressing room? Are there cultural differences that you've noticed between the new way of, the new generation of children coming up with technology and different things?
Yeah, look, there's absolutely no doubt about it. I mean, I am unfortunately old enough to be of an age where, like, I know I sound making myself sound like I'm 60 or 70 now, but even at 40, like, I was of a generation where I lived in a terrace. We had a green in the middle of our terrace, and honestly, Orla, I'm not exaggerating. The match started at about 11 o'clock. Half time was when we were all called in for our dinner at 2 o'clock. You were back out for around 3. Second half kicked off when we got back out around 3, and the game was done when it got too dark to stay playing. And that was our summer. That was our weekends. That is genuinely how it went. And we were probably just in the infancy of the first Nintendos and Segas and Mario and Sonic and that coming through at that time. But it was still still, relatively new, thankfully, and certainly social media or phones or any of that crack didn't exist. And look, obviously that is just gone. It's 100% gone. It doesn't exist anymore. And like the idea of an unorganized sport is just alien to them, completely and utterly alien to them. So you've got this mad thing where you're trying to progress coaching, but one of the biggest things you're trying to do in progressing coaching is harking back to how you recreate something from the olden days, which is a really, really crazy kind of situation. But look, there is no doubt in my eyes that, and this in my current role is a huge area of examination for us at the moment, and an area that we're trying to figure out solutions to is, like, best case scenario, if you're the under 13 hurling manager for your club, you've probably got 4 hours a week contact, maybe thereabouts, 4 to 6 hours a week contact. Like, how much impact are you actually going to be able to have in 4 to 6 hours a week contact? Very, very little in the grand scheme of things. It is all about them having a hurl and a slitter in their hand, or having a Gaelic football in their hands. And how do we encourage that? We have a couple of initiatives that we're looking to start out here in relation to homework, for want of a better way of putting it, but basically just trying to do something that encourages them to be outside, ball, wall, and let's go at it, and let's work on a particular skill, and let's see how many of whatever it is we can do in 60 seconds, and let's see if we can learn to beat that. I was upstairs brushing my teeth yesterday evening when Connor comes sprinting in to tell me that he'd smashed his previous best and had now managed to kick the ball off the wall and catch it 45 times in a row. And this is trying to create little challenges for him that he can then run with himself. And, it's not that mum or dad has to be there with them 24/7, but if we're cute about how we create those little challenges, and then you can let them off. I was going to say send them off. I didn't have to send him out to do that. He just, he was outside doing it, just out of boredom, I suppose, because he'd been told to put down his Nintendo Switch maybe half an hour previously, truth be told. And it's trying to, clubs, schools, county boards, we all need to really put on our thinking caps and figure out how are we going to get them doing bits by themselves at home as often as possible, because to me that's a complete game changer, far more of a game changer than us deciding what we're going to do during the contact hours that we actually have with them.
That's actually something I've asked nearly every coach. What's the most underrated skill you've seen, whether it's in football, Gaelic football, or hurling, or soccer, at the moment, that coaches are overlooking, that we can try put a bit more emphasis on? Is there anything that you just see that we don't pay enough attention to in the game? And it doesn't have to be a practical skill, it could be something else.
Yeah, no, for me, this is my hobby horse, all right, is very much around game intelligence and game awareness. I'm probably jumping a little bit ahead of the likes of Connor's age bracket here, but I suppose particularly if I look at soccer as an example, actually it does dovetail into Gaelic football. I'll give you the first bit first. If I look at soccer as an example, right, there was I'm big into the stats and the numbers and all that kind of crack, right? But they've now gone to new levels in terms of the stats and the numbers, where it's not just passes and all that kind of thing. So one of the best metrics I've seen in recent years is scans per minute. So scans per minute is essentially, in a 60-second period, how many times does a player look around and assess his surroundings. And this is one of the go-to stats that every high-level Premier League manager is wanting to know now. And I mean, some of the numbers are just ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. Like I'm pretty sure that the most recent one showed that in a 60-second period, Kevin De Bruyne actually had more than 60 scans. So he's averaging more than 1 scan per second. And then you can get little clips that actually show it and show him moving around the field. And now they do, to be fair, if you look over your right shoulder and immediately over your left, they count that as 2 scans, if that makes sense. And it just shows him, it follows him over a 60-second period, shows the amount of scans he's done. I think he's in possession of the ball twice during that 60-second period. I think the possession lasts less than 2 seconds on both occasions. But because of the constant scanning, he retains possession on both occasions, he progresses the ball on both occasions, and his third contact with the ball is him arriving into the 18-yard box and putting the ball in the back of the net with a first touch. And I think he scans something like 6 times in the 3 seconds leading into the deciding. So essentially he scans 6 times in 3 seconds, which gives him all the information he needs to decide when to time his run into the box, where to time his run into the box, and then he puts the ball in the back of the net from there. But I think scanning applies in every sport. I think scanning applies in every sport. When I was managing Galway United, I was lucky enough that I don't know if you know David Morris up in oh Jesus, why is my mind gone blank? The boys that won all the football All-Irelands, Club All-Irelands in a row in Mayo.
Are you talking about Corofin?
I am, of course, yeah. Jeez, that was an awful blank to draw. I was lucky enough that David Morris invited me up to Corofin to do a session a week with them for 4 weeks. But he gave me the content at the time. He was brilliant. He was very specific. He basically said, here are 4 concepts in soccer that are coached quite heavily and are emphasised that I don't feel are as coached as heavily or emphasised enough in Gaelic football. Can you go away and have a think about these 4 concepts, and can you come and deliver a training session on each one of those 4 concepts? Which was brilliant, and that's the kind of person David Morris is. He's a deep thinker about things. So I loved that, and one of those was scanning. That was one of the 4 topics. He gave me scanning, and what could I do to improve his Gaelic footballers as scanners. So that, to me, that is probably the one that we're missing the most. I mean, again, I managed our senior hurlers 2 years ago, and I would have said, if you're a cornerback and the ball is coming down and it's coming down between your full back and, well, if it's coming down towards your full back and you know that your full back is likely to win that ball, like in my eyes, what happens is the cornerback stays staring at the fullback until the point where the fullback wins it and hand passes it to him, and then the cornerback goes, right, I have the ball, I better decide what to do with it. Whereas I'm trying to say, he's going to catch that ball, trust him that he's going to catch that ball, start your scanning process now, assess all your options, know what's going on around you. Now he catches it, now he gives it to you. You already know exactly what you're going to do with the ball before you've ever got it in your hands. So I think across sports, the concept of scanning is massive and probably under coached at the moment.
Brilliant. I'm going to ask you, I've the scanning it and how you teach it, and the other 3 concepts that he had, just out of interest, that he wanted to emphasise with his team. What were they?
Yeah, the scanning one is, when I went in there, I actually started by doing a practice that we would do with our under 8s and under 9s with my local soccer team, which is the one of a player standing in the middle between 2 players. So there's one at either end, a player in the middle. They're receiving a pass from one end, they're playing a pass to the other end. I'm sure we've all seen that. The only difference this time is that the players on the 2 ends both have a red and white cone. And when, let's call it, player A is passing the ball into player B, who's the middle person, as they're doing that, player C has to hold up one of the 2 colour cones in the air. So the challenge is for player B to glance over his shoulder, see what colour is being held in the air, shout the colour, all while the ball is on the move on its way to him, and then still collect the ball correctly, and then transfer it down. And then vice versa, it'll come from the opposite side, and the fella on the other end will hold up the one of the 2 colours, and they have to shout what the colour is. And I've used that in pretty much every sport. I've used it in soccer, in Gaelic football, in hurling, in everything, because it just starts to nail it down, or just starts to embed the idea of looking over your shoulder as the ball is on the way to assess your options, rather than, oh, look, I have the ball, I better decide now what I want to do. And that was probably the most basic one. And then a lot of, like, the same as anything, or a lot of coaching is actually the conversations around what you're trying to improve. And particularly with scanning, I would say to players a lot that scanning is something that you have to consciously do for about 3 months. Is kind of the timeline I tend to give players. I say at every training session, whatever about matches, look, heat battle, the concept might get away from you a little bit, but can you approach every single training session you do for the next 3 months, where you're going to, I don't know, write something on your second hand if you have to, or something, where you're going to consciously practice scanning consistently at every training session, and you'll come in and you'll remember it and you'll start doing it, and then you'll find 10 minutes into the training session you'll have forgot about it again, and then you'll need to remind yourself about it again, and then you might refocus on it again and you'll start doing it again. And it does take a lot of focus to try and keep reminding yourself about it. But I'm telling you, once you get towards the end of those 3 months, some will get it quicker, some might need a little bit longer. All of a sudden you'll be in a training session and you'll be scanning, and you might be in the car driving home, and you'll think to yourself, geez, I spent most of tonight's training session scanning, and I didn't actively remind myself to scan at any stage. So I think that's hugely important. So we would have worked that as a basic drill and then talked about the concept of it. And then it's just the coach re-emphasizing it through the training session. You let her roar 7's free for a ball, but 7, are you scanning before you get it? Are you scanning before you get it? And you're firing that information into them as much as possible. So yeah, that was probably the key one that Dave asked me to go after. Trying to think what the other ones were at the time. I know one comes to mind very quickly is the whole concept. I suppose Jurgen Klopp probably made it in vogue. The whole concept of that Keegan pressing is the phrase that's used in soccer. So the concept of you have the ball, you lose the ball, and on losing the ball, rather than letting them counterattack you, you immediately jump back on them again straight away and try and win it. So it's basically counterattacking the counterattack, if that makes sense. I think there was lots of kind of academic papers and research papers showing that it's arguably when a team are at their weakest is if you can counterattack their counterattack or jump on them as they're about to launch a counterattack. Because certain players obviously have moved into positions to launch the counterattack. Therefore, if you can steal the ball straight back, well, now they're out of position. And you've got a great chance. So that was definitely another one that we worked on with him. Another one was trying to show the opposition in a particular direction so that you get them where you want them, and then using triggers to pounce on them to try and turn possession over. Was a third one. I can't remember the fourth one, but I have to say now I really enjoyed it. Now look, I was blessed to be able to be delivering effectively your first ever Gaelic football training sessions to the best club team in the country. Kieran Fitzgerald was part of those sessions, a guy who I think is already showing his colours as a coach, and I think could have a fantastic coaching career. There was a few more, just fantastic fellas. You could see why they had achieved all they had achieved. But again, you have to talk about taking yourself out of your comfort zone. That was about me now, about as far out of my comfort zone as I'd ever been. Thankfully, I've done a good bit since, all right. But back then it was well and truly. But again, there's no point trying to bluff these boys. You have to hold your hand up from the off and say, lads, this is my first time doing this. You're going to have to be patient with me. And some of the stuff that I wrote down and that makes sense on paper to me is probably going to look ridiculous when we actually get into it. And look, if it does look ridiculous, don't worry, I'll realize it's ridiculous and I'll scrap it and we'll try something different. But yeah, it was really, really enjoyable.
Brilliant. I'm going to pick up on 3 things you said there. The scanning, I'm interested in that. Donny Fox on, he's camogie coach in Dublin with St Jude's, and we talked about scanning, and he had 3 cues for players, or the way they teach it is where's the ball, where's the space, and where's your marker. I think I could be wrong, but it's definitely 3 things. Is that something that you would have said for giving them the cues in the moment, or is it how do you teach it in that sense? Are there 3 cues that you would give?
Yeah, pretty much nearly bang in line. I would say maybe one of the ones that he would have thrown out there is where are your teammates. I think that's arguably the most important one because, by and large, regardless of the sport, the teams I've been involved with, I've tried to be a possession-based team. So if you have an idea of where your teammates are before you've received the ball, it should make it a hell of a lot easier for you to be able to find one of those teammates and continue to move it. So yeah, looking for me, it's looking for the space, looking to see where the opposition players are, and most importantly, looking probably to see where your own teammates are. And if you keep talking about those 3 things now, the word scanning should just mean that they are the 3 things that you're trying to assess, in my opinion. Yeah.
That other thing you said about showing them direction of where they're going reminds me of Mick Bowen with the shadowing. He does a great clip of Michael Jordan with the footwork, and something I use with myself because I'm really bad at defending and tackling ladies football is I have the word patience. So when I'm waiting to pounce, what are the cues that the Corofin lads would have used, if you can share them? And is that showing them the direction? Is that shadowing idea or concept of kind of that split stance and forcing them to their weaker side? Is that the same, what I'm thinking?
Yeah, I suppose the key thing is, and again, it'd be a soccer concept that you'd be trying to bring across and see if it works for them as well, is that the sideline is your best friend. You're basically, if you think about it, if a player is standing in the middle of the field, they have 360 degrees to work with. Therefore, they've got a hell of a lot of options in terms of where they go next. Whereas if we can direct them to one side, where if you think about it, if you're out by the sideline, effectively now you've only got 180 degrees to work with. Now it's a hell of a lot easier to try and limit their options and be ready to pounce on their options. Or better again, or if we can get them to a corner, if we're taking them into a corner, they've got 90 degrees to work with, and now we should definitely be able to pounce and take it off them. Look, what I found was inevitably it is harder to do in Gaelic football for the simple reason that it is easier to retain possession with your hands than it is to retain possession with your feet. But at the same time, I think they felt that they got something out of it because, if we can, I would be big into talking about the parallel width of the pitch in lanes. So I would be talking about, in any sport, again, I think you can divide the width of the pitch, let's say, into 5 equal lanes. And what I would be trying to say to the lads is, ideally, we're trying to show them all the way across to lane 1 or to lane 5. And once we get them, let's say if we do get the ball, man on the ball, all the way across to lane 1, like, considering the ball can't travel as far in Gaelic football as it can in hurling, I think if we've got them in lane 1, we could effectively aim to have all 15 of our players in lanes 1, 2, and 3. There should be no need for any of our players to be over in lanes 4 or 5. We can get back across to lanes 4 and 5 as the ball has been transferred across the field. But if we've got all 14 of our outfield players in lanes 1, 2, and 3, as we've managed to push them, the ball possession player across to lane 1, you're nicely set up now to try and box them in and turn possession over and steal it off them if you can,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard of that lane concept before within Gaelic football or basketball. The other thing I want to ask was, you were talking about the counter-attack and positions of, let's say, when you're countering an attack. How much of field sport, and I'm including, let's say, Gaelic football and soccer now in 2023 in the modern day, is down to set plays versus player freedom in play?
Yeah, it depends, I suppose, on the coach and the coach's philosophy and I would argue the level of the team that the coach is working with. So to take it to my current position as Cobh Ramblers manager in soccer, we were finished rock bottom last year. Okay, so we were coming into this year as a big underdog. I think any time you look at a team who is an underdog who manages to overachieve, you'll do well to find a scenario where proficiency on set pieces wasn't a big part of it for them, because it is a great leveler. Do you know what I mean? Like there's a hell of a chance that if we work on it enough and players taking instruction enough, there is a hell of a chance that Cobh Ramblers can be pretty much as good at our corner kicks as Pep Guardiola's Man City. There's no reason in the world why we can't literally be better than Manchester City at corner kicks. There really isn't. So it is a great leveler. And yeah, we would be putting a big emphasis on it at the moment, Orla, within our Cobh setup. We've got quite a few goals from set pieces this year. You laugh, and maybe it's not it's not maybe the most aesthetic thing in the world for me to be saying, but we specifically went after and recruited a player with a long throw. That has been a massive help to us. I think we're in and around 4 goals created either from the first or second phase of a long throw. He's got an absolutely phenomenal long throw now. It is a big help to us. So yeah, I think set pieces are very important, particularly for the underdog. And I don't think there's anything wrong with admitting that and looking to capitalise and looking to be as good as you can in that area. We would probably comment on the fact in our dressing room before any game that, lads, whatever about anything else, we don't lose the set piece battle tonight. In other words, if we can score more goals from a set piece tonight than they do, there's a hell of a chance that we manage to win the game. So yeah, we would certainly focus on it a hell of a lot, Orla.
Mm-hmm. You're a pro, Shane. My next question was going to be, can you describe your coaching philosophy or ethos?
No, I'll tell you, I'm not. It's gas. And I wouldn't say I'm one with a coaching philosophy, to be quite honest. I struggled with this, Orla. I remember Seamus, I don't know if you know Shay in UCD, Seamus Kelly. He'd be a fantastic guest for you to have on if you could. Like Shay has a phenomenal background. I think he won a Leinster, if not an All-Ireland in goal in Gaelic football for Offaly. He then went on, had a professional playing career initially in the League of Ireland, then across with Cardiff, I think, in the UK. But since then went back and he's what his exact title is, but he's, I want to have a better way of describing it, he's almost head of the sports studies courses up in UCD. An unbelievable guy. I first met him in the GAA coaching conference a few years back. Actually, he was one of the presenters at it, so he was, and we stayed in touch. And he's the guy who ended up getting me onto the masters that I was on. But why have I gone off on a tangent there? Remind me, what was the question?
Coaching philosophy, and how you
That's
don't
right.
have one.
That's right. So Shay was one of my lecturers, and his class was the science of coaching, which was brilliant, absolutely fascinating. You could listen to Shay talk forever now. You really could. But he started talking to us about your philosophy and knowing your philosophy and all of this kind of thing. And the truth is, and he almost kind of said, I said I don't have a coaching philosophy. I said I would be much more one for going into a club, seeing what I have at my disposal, seeing what I can get my hands on, and then deciding on a style of play and a game plan that best suited what I had at my disposal. And to me, that meant I didn't have a coaching philosophy because I wasn't Pep Guardiola possession obsessed. I wasn't Sam Allardyce direct obsessed. I was willing to go with whatever I thought would. But I suppose Shay's explanation there was, well, no, that's your coaching philosophy. That in itself is a coaching philosophy. You don't have to be 100% nailed to the mast on one way or other of playing. And that's why, you hear of people who are, obsessed with Pep and people who are obsessed with, I suppose, Bielsa was the buzz man there for a while, so he wasn't a whole lot. The one Orla that I've probably most enjoyed reading about and most trying to align myself to is Carlo Ancelotti, because I read Carlo Ancelotti's book. It's probably the best sports coach, it's certainly in the top 3 sports coaching books that I've ever read, and he just struck me as he's my kind of fella. Like I can read about Sir Alex Ferguson all day long. I can read about Brian Cody all day long. I won't say it's pointless, but it's kind of pointless because they're completely and utterly different personality types to me. I don't know if I have the capability to try that rule with an iron fist style of management. It's just not natural to me. I could fake it, and I understand situations require you. There is situational management, and there is scenarios where you need to occasionally let loose and all that kind of stuff. But it probably doesn't come overly naturally to me. And reading Ancelotti's book, and his kind of arm around the shoulder approach, and his attempts to empower players and give players a huge amount of say on what was happening and all of that all struck a chord with me. And he was definitely one that I thought, yeah, I like this guy. And then on top of that, he is 100% a fella who goes in without a dedicated style of play, has a look at what he's got at his disposal, and then concocts a formation and a style of play based on that. So that's the long-winded answer to what's my philosophy. I don't have one, but I suppose not having one is one.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And I was listening to a podcast on coaching, or it could have been a clip online, and it was all about, and I wanted to ask you as a percentage, or could you break it down in how much of coaching or managing is actually people skills versus knowledge of the game, your philosophy, your style of play?
The longer I'm at it, Orla, the more I'm leaning towards the first, being just not quite the be all and end all, but like at times it's mad. At times you can put. I was at Galway United, Orla, and things didn't go well for me at Galway United, and I swear to God, I put every minute of every day into trying. And I was a full-time manager over there, so I could afford to do it. But I was putting every minute of every day obsessing with how could I turn this around? Why is this not going well? Meeting with players, looking at different tactical ways of playing, looking at different things to do in training. Like I did absolutely everything I could to turn it around, and it just nothing worked, and you end up getting sacked and losing your job, and that's the reality of football management. And then I swear to God, I look at the 2 most successful periods, which were winning the league with Wexford in 2015, and the current moment that I'm in with Cobh Ramblers, which is phenomenal at the moment. How much we've turned things around, and it seems so easy at the moment. Like it seems so easy because we keep winning. We just keep doing what we did last week, and then we win again. So we just keep doing what we did last week. And like coaching is so easy when you're winning and when things are going well. It really, really is. And the more and more I look at it, the more and more I think, well, at Galway, did I overcomplicate it? I probably did overcomplicate it, but I suppose losing makes you overcomplicate things and makes you second guess yourself maybe that bit more. But like at this moment in time for us at Cobh, it's just all about managing relationships, managing people, making sure people are in good headspaces. I mean, we couldn't be less complicated when it comes to the game plan at the moment. We couldn't be less complicated in terms of what we're doing in training sessions at the moment. It's light, it's enjoyable, it's following a pattern that I know the boys enjoy, and still ticks the boxes that we needed to tick for them in terms of preparing for it. But I would say I am managing Cobh Ramblers at the moment on probably 10 to 15 hours a week. and we're having a phenomenally successful period, I was putting 50 to 60 hours a week in at Galway United, 50 to 60, without a doubt, and got nothing from it. You know, which I don't know what it tells you about coaching and management, to be honest with you.
No, it's interesting. And speaking of managing people, when you're part of a backroom or when you're building a backroom more so, what do you look for in the people around you? That I don't understand. Maybe you didn't have a choice and some people you brought in, but how do you build that backroom of people that support you in your role, whether it's actually involved in Cobh or it's people outside of your football circle that you can lean on or ring, or there's people I know I can give a ring when I'm struggling or with coaching and I have questions. Who is in your corner and how do you pick those people?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, and again, it's a really, really interesting one when you compare soccer with GAA as well, Orla, to be honest with you, because there's so little money in the League of Ireland that the opportunity to bring personnel with you when you go to somewhere is pretty much non-existent. Like almost any manager will end up coming in and working with local staff, even though they've relocated. So, you know, Waterford are currently second in our division. Keith Long, fantastic, absolutely outstanding manager with Bohemians there over the last few years. He's now the Waterford United manager, and he had a phenomenal partnership with Trevor Colley when he was at Bohemians. But, you know, could Waterford afford for Keith Long to be able to bring Trevor Colley with him? No, they probably couldn't, because there's only really one top dog that clubs can afford to pay. So Keith Long is now in a situation that couldn't be more different to him. He's now down at Waterford working with local Waterford staff, all good guys, absolutely 100% good guys. But are they necessarily his guy? You know, they're not. You know, I was on Keith's pro license. You know, I don't know whether Keith and Trevor knew each other much from their playing career, but certainly Keith and Trevor became very close during our pro license. And that's probably where the relationship struck up. And Keith then, when he got the Bows job, decided, right, Trevor Colley's the guy I want to bring in here. And they had phenomenal success, you know. And it just shows, like, I've had that pretty much everywhere I've gone. You've had to go with, you know, somebody local, and again, some brilliant people. But I managed our senior hurlers 2 years ago. And the two guys who managed my local senior hurlers with me were a guy that I lived with for 4 years in college and a guy who was groomsman at my wedding. You know what I mean? It's very different. It's very, 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 very different. These are guys that you absolutely know inside out and trust with your absolute life, and you know they've got your back. And there's a hell of a lot to be said for that in a GAA sense. Whereas really you just have to try and do the best you can do in soccer. Now, again, I've been blessed this year. It's gas. My predecessor, when he was relieved of his duties as Cobh Ramblers manager, the rest of the management team went with him in unison, which is fair play to them, brilliant to see. But upon kind of arriving down and seeing out the remainder, I'd only maybe 7-8 games as I was maybe more 10 games as Cobh manager at the end of last year. You know, chatting to players and that sort of stuff, and looking around at what sort of support staff I was going to bring in for the following year. It was amazing that the players were saying to me, listen, Shane, I know we're kind of down around the bottom, and I know Darren is after losing his job, and from the outside it probably looks like everything was wrong here. They were able to tell me everything wasn't wrong here, Shane. It was, by and large, it was a pretty good setup. We just couldn't quite get things to fully click. But they sang the praises of the first team coach who had departed with the manager, Fran Rocket, and they sang the coaches of the S&C coach, Dermy Ryan, incredibly highly. And then it was just a case of me, I suppose, not wanting to have an ego and feel that, you know, I need to show that I'm doing this all my own way. If the boys are good fellas in that dressing room, if they were telling me that these were two great guys to have involved, well then, you know, why reinvent the wheel here? So I went back to both guys. Both said that in I suppose in support and in unison with Darren, they would like to, you know, remain and step aside certainly for the remainder of the season, but we're happy to chat to me in the off season about coming in for the 2023 season. And that's how it played out. Both of those guys are now back in. They're both doing phenomenal jobs. Fran, as my head coach, is brilliant. I mean, you come back to the question you asked of what are you looking for in somebody. What you're looking for and what you can get tend to be two different things. But thankfully in this case, what I was looking for was exactly what I got, in that I would regard myself as having a good relationship with my players, maybe allow myself to get a little bit closer to players maybe than some other managers would, but yet I'm not the I absolutely detest the word banter, but you know, when they use the word banter, crack or slagging is probably the best word for me to use, right? I'm not the quickest with my tongue when it comes to the slagging and the to and fro and all that, Whereas that counts for a lot in a dressing room. Trust me, believe me, it counts for a hell of a lot around the setup. That if a player says something smart, you have to be able to come back with something twice as smart and put him in his place very quickly. Fran is phenomenal on that side of things. One of the most quick-witted guys I've ever come across, and will absolutely have a player with a comment very, very easily, and will have all the rest of the players in stitches laughing when he pulls that out, and yet manages to deliver the line in a way that the player who's being insulted doesn't get insulted, takes it in the sense and in the meaning that it was meant when it was delivered. And he is, I mean, I would regard myself as being a fairly positive person. Fran would put me in the shade when it comes to positivity. When he walks into a room, everybody gets a high five, everybody gets told how much he loves them, all this kind of stuff. Almost OTT if it wasn't delivered with such genuineness. And look, it's trying to have people who maybe share some of your beliefs, but maybe at the same time have slightly different skill set to you at the same time.
Does your coaching style change when you go from GAA to soccer?
Yeah, it does a bit. I think you always have to be very, very conscious of your audience. And audiences differ. The backgrounds of players from different codes are slightly different. I would have had Johnny O'Connor from who's now actually gone in, but just last week I think has gone in as head of S&C for the Galway Hurlers under Chef. I had Johnny O'Connor as my S&C coach in Galway. Obviously he was coming in from a professional rugby background, former Irish international rugby player. He couldn't understand how my video sessions were capped to 15 minutes. He was coming from a situation where their video sessions were an hour plus. Unbelievable, but there's very different cultures there. There's very, very different cultures there. So there is, in soccer, the boys are mad to get in the pitch as quickly as they possibly can. Without insulting them too much, some of them would tell you the old attention spans maybe at times aren't the highest or aren't the longest. And you need to be able to deliver a short, sharp, quick message to them, give them the info they need, and then bang, let's go, on we go. Whereas, I don't know, the rugby boys, they're coming from a bit of a different background. It's kind of just ingrained with them that, a video session does mean sitting down, for an hour and, a hell of a lot of Q&A around it maybe and that kind of stuff. So again, I think you have to, probably the easiest way, as I say, Arlen, to put is you have to know your audience and you have to try to deliver your message in the manner that they are best capable of taking it on board.
When you're coaching in either sport, I'm always interested by, and I listened to the clip with Keith, I forget his surname, the Cork under-20 manager. He was with the seniors. Yeah, he was on the How to Win at Domino's, and he was talking about the GPS and how one fella looked like he was flatlined on the pitch, but he had won 6 and somebody else had 1 point and they had 9 kilometres. How do you let the impact, or how do you kind of bring numbers into your coaching, and not only GPS, but I'm more so interested in stats, during the game, maybe during training? How much do you let that impact your approach and your game on the day? Is there a set way that you do it? Do you look at certain things, or do you kind of just keep it as playing and let that in the background?
Yeah, I'm obsessed with numbers, Orla. I don't know where it comes from, but I suppose even right back to, I look at my own young fella now again, and you're looking at traits that you share in that, and he's a numbers guy. He'd do maths all day, but he just wanted to open his Irish book. And I was the exact same. I was always good with numbers. My leaving cert results were, I think, the three A's were in and around kind of maths and accountancy and that sort of crack, and then French was a D and Irish was a D and all that kind of, it was a numbers head, I suppose. So naturally enough, I do lean towards it. I mean, Orla, you should see the match report that we get after a League of Ireland game. There's a company called Y Scout that we're all on as a League of Ireland. They have a league-wide subscription. We get a 32-page statistical match report after every League of Ireland game. Level of detail in these things is just incredible. And you could get lost. And this is the thing, is you need to learn very quickly to decipher which pages contain the information that you're concerned with, because different coaches will, prioritize different bits of information. I'm sure there are plenty of coaches in the League of Ireland, managers in the League of Ireland, who've never opened a Y Scout match report because they might have no interest in numbers, and they're probably doing very, very well without ever opening it. It's just different strokes for different folks, I suppose. But I would be massively, massively into it. What I would have learned over the years was, I think initially, and it was a case of everything I knew, the lads needed to know. and the lads needed to know how much I knew, almost, if that makes sense, which was maybe a bit of an ego thing. Whereas I've learned very quickly, still okay for you to be obsessed with Shane and you to need to know absolutely everything, but you don't need to burden them with it all. Like, sure, they don't really give a shit, by and large. I have maybe 2-3 players who maybe have a numbers head like I had when I was younger and will ask me for the Boy Scout match report, and I will always share it with them. I have no problem sharing it with them whatsoever. And aside from that, what I do, Orla, and it's a bit of crack, but at the same time, I do think it serves a purpose. So what happens is we've got Bray Wanderers this coming Friday night. So what happens is on a Wednesday morning, I will share. So, by the way, you have access to everybody's match reports, not just your own. It's open access for all. Okay. So I will have been pouring through all Bray's numbers over the last 48 hours or so. And come Wednesday morning, I will share a match report from a recent Bray Wanderers game into our WhatsApp group, players' WhatsApp group. Okay. And then the players, I don't have to tell them anymore. They know what the crack is there, right? They are expected to open that and have a bit of a look through it. Okay. The boys that are into it will pour through it. There will definitely be half the squad who won't even open the fucking thing. And I know they don't even open the thing, right? But the bit of crack is when they come in, the start of our video session is I'll split them into 4 groups of 5, and I'm going to ask 5 questions where the answers were in the Y Scout report, but they're not allowed to open the Y Scout report now. So it will be, and they'll be straightforward enough ones, maybe, but they will always, the answer will always be something that we're going to focus on in the video. Okay, so let's say it could be, okay, boys, what Bray Wanderers player had the most successful passes in last week's game? And the boys all have to write down their answers, and there's a different member of the coaching staff allocated to each team to take scores and all this kind of crack. And then inevitably, when we go to the video will show that player on the ball a lot and will show a lot of the passes that he played and his passing range and that kind of crack. Whereas another question could be, of the back 4, which one of the back 4 lost the most amount of aerial duels? And then do they know the answer to that one? And then there's a bit of crack at the end, which team got the most. But again, when we go to the video, Orla, we will then watch that player losing quite a lot of aerial duels, and we will then take that onto the training ground and talk about, let's say it's the right back. Okay, how are we going to try and get at the right back in the air? And how are we going to try and get on top of his weakness? So in answer to your question, yeah, it's a big part of things for me, but as I say, very important that the manager can take on the burden, but don't push it all on top of the players, even to finish it, even at Dundalk, when I was at Dundalk, because that was my main role at Dundalk. I was opposition analyst when I went in at Dundalk at first, and like Michael Duffy is certainly top 3 players in the League of Ireland. So he is absolutely outstanding player and a fantastic young man as well. But I mean, I'd be doing my video analysis session, and I could see we'd like a little mini cinema in Dundalk because they had great facilities up there. Like I could see Michael falling asleep up in the top corner of the room. So I could see that, but it never bothered me, or I never rattled him with it or anything like that. And on match night, as he's going to walk out onto the pitch, Michael will turn around to you and say, Shane, did you tell me I'm better off trying to beat the right back on his inside or on his outside? And you'll just turn around and say, on his inside, Michael. Thanks, Shane. And he'll just jog on. And that's it. He only wants, he might ask a different, he'll probably have one question for you. He just wants to know, and then off he'll go and he'll do his thing. And, he doesn't need all the other stuff that I'm after trying to burden them.
Yeah, I love the way you said 15-minute cap in the video, but I also love the way you said everybody in the League of Ireland gets the same report. And I can just imagine any GAA managers listening going, oh no, because the way the GAA culture, it's so secretive. We don't tell anyone what we're doing. We don't even share. And I'm interested in and I have so many more questions, Shane. I could go into all of this in depth with you, but something I've been good at before and I'm not great at this year is balancing sport with everything else. And I know you have a family and you've a job and everything. How do you balance both and you're not getting too caught up in what's happening? And what I love is I've somehow got now involved in 3 teams. I was only involved with 1 and now I'm in 3, and I've 4 matches in 8 days. But how do you balance that with everything else of keeping it all? The way I always think of it is don't get too high with the highs and don't get too low with the lows.
Yeah, no, I suppose there's 2 questions in one there. The don't get too high with the highs and don't get too low with the lows. I think I'm good at that. Just in terms of perspective has taught me that, and I suppose, the Galway experience was the worst experience in my life in some ways, and yet it's the best experience in my life in some ways, in that it was probably me reaching rock bottom and me kind of deciding, sport or the wins or losses in sport are never going to have that much of a hold on my general demeanour ever again, and making a conscious decision that was going to be the case. And I would say anybody who meets me now would, comparing me to maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago, it still means the world to me. But it's not the be all and end all. It's absolutely not the be all and end all. And I'm still able to enjoy my weekend even if the result doesn't go my way. In terms of the balance thing, I don't know if I have it right at the moment. I have it somewhat right at the moment, maybe. I suppose to go backwards to come forwards, 2015 professionally was in sport the best year of my life, in that we won the League of Ireland with a team that were, I think, in and around 50-1 at the start of the season to win that division. So on the outside, things couldn't have been going better. Like, it was phenomenal what we'd achieved, really. So it was. And yet on the inside, Orla, I mean, I was living in Laois. I was working in Naas. I was the advertising manager of a newspaper in Naas. And my football commitments were in Wexford. And at the start of that year, I had my first and still only child was born. It was, quite honestly, a fucking horrible year. It really was. You were constantly struggling with not being around enough and feeling like the phrase I've used is probably an absentee father. And it ate me up now. It really, really did eat me up. Being around so little for the first year of your own kid's life is just a horrible place to be in. And to be fair, Mick Wallace has his detractors, Orla, I'm sure. You're well aware he's a fairly controversial character, so he is, to put it mildly. But at the end, the day we won the league, I had asked my wife Roisin to have Connor down at our last game, and when the final whistle went, she kind of handed Connor out to me straight away. And honestly, like he's only one, he can't understand, but it was literally just everybody else was going mental celebrating, and I was literally just whispering into his ear, promising him that I'd never let that happen again. And then Mick, kind of within a week or so, I would say, I would say fairly quickly anyway, I'd say within a week or so, Mick had made me full-time. I explained to him that could never happen again, and he made me full-time as Wexford manager, which made things a hell of a lot better balance-wise. And yet, I'm now at a stage where, having done the Galway thing full-time as well, I now don't really have any interest in ever being a full-time football manager again, because when you become a full-time football manager, it consumes your life, and it's 24/7. And quite honestly, and I think this is a good thing to be able to say, there's far too many things that I like doing to let one thing consume my life. I don't ever want to not be involved in the GAA. I don't ever not want to be able to do media whenever I want to do media. I don't ever want to, lose an entire week to a laptop and to a training pitch when Connor has go games on, or we're big into our athletics as well in our house, and athletics meetings on a Sunday morning and all of that kind of stuff. So even though I'm back in a scenario where I'm juggling a full-time job with a League of Ireland team, I now love my full-time job. The League of Ireland thing I'm loving. Obviously that's because results are going as well as they are. But I don't think you could count on one hand how many of Connor's matches in hurling, Gaelic football, soccer, athletics that I've missed this year, because I just I kind of have a good balance there, and at the moment it's going pretty well. But it is tough. It's tough to get right.
It's funny, when you talk about that book you're reading in terms of personalities, my personality would very much match you. Of I cannot have all my eggs in one basket. Like I can't. I have to have, as you say, like that resonated with me so much. I'm thinking exactly what you're saying there, of having all my different things that I'm going on, and I love it, and it keeps me free. But as somebody, and I know you've spoken about this, what would your advice be to anybody that has gotten fired? Because really 90% of the time you are going to get let go, unless you're Jim Gavin doing 5 in a row, 6 in a row. You can set your own terms.
Oh, look, 100%. And I don't know if you remember him kicking soccer. He was a bit mad too. Stephen Hunt, who was sure Hunty has, however, a huge amount of caps for Ireland. Hunty has gone into the agency game, and he represented me on the Galway deal. And I remember him giving me a real kind of burst of realism, I suppose, when we were sitting down to negotiate the contract for Galway. He said to me, look, Shane, we can look at all the various different things that go into a contract here, but essentially the only thing that really matters is how much have they to pay you the day they sack you. That's the key thing that we need to nail down here, because they will sack you. 9 times out of 10, that is how, certainly in soccer management, 9 times out of 10, that's how the relationship comes to an end, is with the manager being sacked. So what happens on the day you get sacked? How much have they to give you? How nailed down is it? How much they have to give you? Over what period of time have they to give you that? And all of those things are, it's mad that that's your starting position when joining a new club, is what happens the day you sack me. And look, I was lucky enough, or in the manner that it was handled. I would have got on very well with most of the people at Galway, all of the people at Galway, really, to be honest with you. We drew a game on a Friday night where I knew, kind of heading into the game on a Friday night, if I don't get the 3 points here, I'd say I'm in bother. We drew that game. I got a phone call from, I definitely won't go into names, but I got a phone call from somebody on the board on the Saturday evening saying, listen, Shane, you're going to get a call in the morning asking you to attend a meeting tomorrow at lunchtime. At that meeting, you're going to be given your P45. So I said, look, cheers for the heads up, appreciated. And even at the age I'm at now, my next phone call then was to my darling mother. My mother is, as I think I was mentioning earlier, heavily involved in high level business, and a serious operator. So I just called her, and coolly and clinically as I could, told her, listen, I'm getting the bullet tomorrow. Give me a bit of advice here on how I handle this, and what way to because negotiations in soccer tend to be, well, you're entitled to this, but here's what we're actually going to try and give you. But listen, she gave me some very, very good advice around how handling all of that. I went into that meeting. They asked me for my opinion on how the season was going. I gave them my opinion. I knew what was coming at the end of it anyway. I asked them, they told me, look, we've decided to make a change. I asked them, was there anything I could do to change their mind? They said no. And I said, right, look, your mind's made up. So let's get on to the negotiation about the severance and all that. There was a little bit of to and fro on the severance, but thanks to Mam's advice, I managed to box it off fairly well, and was happy enough with the agreement that we had reached. And then honestly, Orla, from there, myself and the main guy who was involved, the man whose chief job it was to essentially fire me, the two of us it was in the Connacht Hotel in Galway. We went out to the front bar, we ordered 2 drinks, and we sat down, and he asked for my advice in terms of my replacement. And we chatted for an hour, and we went through some options, and he has rang me on a couple of things here and there. We currently have 2 Galway United players on loan at Cobh Ramblers who are doing sensationally well for me, while Galway have the league title wrapped up. So it's a win-win season for me and for Galway this year. So we're all in a good place. But yeah, look, I'd be lying if I said, you'd be a little bit more inclined to let your wife go down to the shop rather than you going down to the shop for a couple of weeks after, because you just don't want to be bumping into people and talking about it. You as a person can be as positive as you want and try and handle it in as positive a manner as you want. But if the people around you who, not that they'd be having a dig, they just genuinely wouldn't, it wouldn't occur to them that, well, Shane probably doesn't want to talk about getting sacked. They'd be well-meaning. Like, they could be coming over to say, Jesus, that's awful that they did that. They mean well, but the last thing you would need is to be talking to people. Look, by and large, the man on the streets knowledge of League of Ireland is certainly around County Laois. There wouldn't be much of a League of Ireland stronghold there now, I can tell you that's for sure. So the man on the street probably wouldn't know a huge amount about what's been going on. All they hear is that Shane Keegan got sacked as Galway manager, and look, they're probably trying to be nice to you, but at the same time you'd rather avoid them. But after a while, you just have to get back on the horse as quickly as you can. And I would say within probably within a couple of months, I was kind of over it fairly quickly, and then thankfully the opportunity at Dundalk came up before the year was even out.
Mm-hmm. That's actually and you're dead right, and I'm sure I'll pick you up on again, and maybe off air at some point. I am conscious of time. I want to ask you one more question before the Sideline 7. You were host of How to Coach at Domino's, or How to Win at Domino's, apologies. Looking at the guest list, I actually have not listened to it, Jane, but I'm going to go on, and I am going to pay for it and listen. But I wanted to ask you, what was your biggest takeaway or top 3 from interviewing the calibre of guests you had on? Like I saw there, Paul Kinnerk, different people that you had. Was there any particular standout takeaway, lesson, point that you took from that series?
Jesus, where do you start? Look, I would say probably my favourite guest, and that's not to slight any of the rest. I was blessed to have the people on it, and there is talks about trying to get it. If I can eventually get enough time, there will be another series of it. I would say and I'm not a rugby man by any stretch of the imagination, or that's probably the sport I know the least about, but Pat Lam was phenomenal. You've spoken there earlier on about, dealing with people and how important the dealing with people side of things is. Oh my God. Like, I suppose the best way of putting it is, if Pat Lam had asked me to jump out the bedroom window when we were finished that conversation, I wouldn't have even questioned. I would, yes, Pat, no bother whatsoever, gone, and out through the window. You just hear the smash behind. I would say, his ability to build relationships, real solid relationships, with people would be absolutely incredible. Look, by and large, all of them are, there's very few secrets left in it anymore. I think everybody who's achieved anything now has come around to the idea that it is people first. It is about the relationships first. That kept getting reiterated over and over. I mean, Kinnerk, look, probably the biggest name that we had on it, purely, well, one, because of his level of success, two, because he does so little. I mean, the thing with Kinnerk is just, again, it's no surprise to me. The level of preparation just seems to be absolutely incredible. And I would love to see. I'm surprised, to be honest with you, that Kinnerk hasn't set more of a trend around teams being a little bit more focused on the academic qualifications of the coach. I mean, he has literally spent his life studying how to be a coach. And yet, 9 times out of 10, who does a team turn to when they want a coach? They want a former big name player who has possibly done no actual coaching, or never opened a book or read a thing about coaching or anything like that. I just think Kinnerk is doing it differently than everybody. He's doing it differently than everybody. Even the people who think, me included, even those of us who think we're following Kinnerk in terms of how we try and do it, we're still not winning Ass's roar of how he's doing it. And I'm amazed that I think we just need, everybody should be looking to get there. I don't understand how everybody is not just trying to do everything they can to try and bring that approach to it, that's the level of preparation that's expected, that's the amount of thinking and thought. I suppose time is the key here, or it's all well and good saying that we'd love to put that level of prep, but look, he's got a big brain as well. That feckin' helps. I could possibly put as much time and effort and prep into it, but I'm still not maybe going to see things in quite the manner that he sees things. I just think he's phenomenal. I think he's Ireland's best coach, regardless of sport. He's a phenomenal guy. So it was a privilege. Look, he was never going to give away state secrets on the podcast, that's for sure. I'm not telling you that he did, but he was, at the same time, he was a phenomenal person just to be able to have a bit of a chat with, because I just hold him so highly.
Did you get to watch a session, or was it just that conversation with him?
No, it was just that conversation. He has fired me on one or two bits, all right. So he has here and there. And look, I just think he has quite a lot of academic papers out there, Orla, that I think coaches would get a huge amount from reading. Look, I know academic papers can be a little bit heavy going, but even if we're just reading the intro and then reading the kind of the results and the findings and the conclusions from it, I think there's a hell of a lot to be picked up from there. Obviously, he has his disciples then in the Lavins, who have the Game Sense coaching website, which I'd be a big fan of. I have to confirm it all with him, but I'm pretty sure we're good. We're running a series of coach education workshops here in Laois GAA at the start of the new year. Stephen Lavin will present on one of them for me, without a doubt. He did a podcast with another good Laois man here. He did a podcast with Wooly there a few weeks ago, which was phenomenal. Wooly's podcast is obviously another subscription podcast, but I actually rang Wooly after it and says, listen, is there any chance you'll do me a favour there? Could you give me a free link to that one that I can send on to our coaches here in Laois? Because, I mean, nail on head, my God, Stephen Lavin absolutely speaking the gospel of Kinnerk, hit the nail on the head exactly as to how I would like my coaches, sorry, that's an awful phrase to use, the coaches in Laois GAA, how I would like them to go about things, and how I'd like them to try and get the, how to plan and be meticulous, and the idea of the small sided games and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, look, it's Kinnerk all the way for me,
Brilliant. Okay, I'm going to have to move on to Sideline 7. We've 7 minutes till you have to go. Question 1, Shane, what's your favourite quote?
Well, the first thing I'll say is I'm not mad into them, if I'm honest with you. I find them a bit Americanized, and the whole lot. And I suppose I think I don't know whether this is a quote or motto. If it's a quote, I don't know who said it, but it's more so just the concept, I suppose, of don't let life happen to you, make the life you want happen. I just think too many people in the world just life happens to them, and it's where there was no control over what happened. I think the idea, I just love the idea of know what you want and go after it in a strategic way, and don't, you'll have so many, anything I've gone after that I wanted and I got there, there's plenty of things I wanted that I haven't got there, but even the things where I did get there, I'll tell you, you hit some amount of roadblocks and setbacks before you eventually get there, but just keep going after them, make the things you want to happen.
Brilliant. Question 2, what's the best sporting event you've been to? And you can pick one as a fan and one as a coach.
Ooh. As a fan, 2014 drawn All-Ireland hurling final, Kilkenny and Tip. The Bubbles VAR, I nearly called it. Look, I'm getting my sports mixed up again. The Bubbles Hawkeye. Unbelievable match, absolutely unbelievable match. I'm a rare one in that I'm from Laois. Kilkenny being our neighbours, there tends to be a bit of a grudge there, but yeah, that I also that guy I was telling you who coached with me that lived in college. There was a few of us living at that house, and another person living in that house was JJ Delaney. So I lived with Jay for a good few years down in college. He's a guy you get on incredibly well with, and I would have found it impossible to ever bar Laois obviously, but anybody else I would have found it impossible to ever shout against Jay. In any game really that he ever hurled in. And I actually became a roaring mad Kilkenny fan for a long time when he was part of that. But that match was incredible. That was probably the best hurling match I've ever been at in my life. Yeah. In terms of participating in it, yeah, look, probably the game where we wrapped up the league title with Wexford Youths was just an incredible achievement, as I say, to be able to achieve such a thing with a group of players that the expectation would have been so low around. It was quite a feeling. Mixed emotions, as I say, with Connor involved, but still a very, very incredibly enjoyable feeling. Yeah.
Very good. Question 3, what's been the biggest setback or challenge so far in your career, and how did you react to it?
Yeah, 2 again. I've outlined one already. Relegation with Galway was tough, very, very tough. How did I respond? Poorly, is the answer. I suppose the biggest problem was Ireland, by going down, we were then favourites the following season to come back up. Situation I've probably never been in my life. I've kind of always managed underdog teams, and I handled that very, very poorly. I would always pride myself on signing players based on character and personality, and because of the pressure that I had to go and win that league straight away, I gambled on a few players where I probably knew the personality type or the character wasn't right, but they had a huge amount of ability, and I was kind of banking on that ability being enough, and that backfired on me. Even in relegation with Galway, we had a fantastic dressing room, but the following year I didn't get that dynamic right, so I didn't, and it led to me losing my job really that year. So that was a big mistake. Second biggest challenge was looking. I'm in a Moore Park here. That's my office is in Moore Park here. I'm literally looking out onto the pitch. We lost the county semi-final here 2 years ago. I was over my own club. All my experience in soccer and been involved with Dundalk and sidelines in Europa League and everything, don't think I've ever wanted to achieve as much as I wanted to win a county title with my own club. Never wanted to achieve so much. And losing a county semi-final by 1 point to a Club Ballacalla team that went on to contest the Leinster club final that year was heartbreaking.
Absolutely. On the flip side then, what's been your biggest achievement on or off the pitch?
Look, it's an absolutely amazing thing to be able to say, but I think I'm living it at the moment, Orla, to be honest. Absolutely rock bottom with Cobh Ramblers last year. Everybody assuming that exactly the same thing would happen again this year. And Friday night just passed, we won a game that confirmed us as guaranteed our qualification for the promotion playoff with 4 games to spare. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing what the lads have done, to be honest with you. And look, I really hope we can go and give a good account of ourselves now in the playoffs. We've still got 4 league games to play out, obviously, and that still determines who plays who in the playoffs. But the big pressure is off. It's going to be strange heading into four remaining games with the pressure off, and then it's on to the playoffs. And look, we will go into the playoffs as massive underdogs, but then again, we were massive underdogs at the start of the season, and we've completely defied expectation to date. So who says we can't continue to defy them? And My God, I think that, to be honest with you, I think the board of Cobh Ramblers would have an absolute heart attack if we ended up in League of Ireland Premier Division side next year. But sure, listen, we'll let them worry about that if we did manage to pull it all off.
Brilliant. Looking back, Shane, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self?
Yeah, I did my leaving cert at 17, so I'll probably have to go back to 17-year-old self rather than 18-year-old self. Do something in college that you have a passion for. I went to college. I was good with numbers, as I say, and that's probably what led to it. I went to college and I did business studies. I just, it was a box ticking exercise, really. So it was. And I went in, I did 3 years, got a diploma, came out. Are you actually really qualified to do anything with a diploma in business studies? You're not really. And that led to me then, going into sales and all that kind of crack, which, look, it was good to, as I say, sales stood to me because it's such a people person thing. But, 2018, 17, I went back and did a master's in coaching science. And, I just think if I'd gone the coaching route in college at 17 years of age, I could have saved myself 15 years of trying to sell newspaper ads to people who probably didn't want to buy newspaper ads. The career I have now, which is my dream, really, to be honest with you, the career I'm in at the moment, I'm 41. I possibly could have had that career closer to 21 than 41.
Very good. Who would be, and I always say, who would be your dream dinner guest, or I might change this one for you, Shane, who would be your dream podcast guest if you could have any coach in the world?
Well, when you sent me through the questions, I did a little bit of stuttering and stumbling over the rest, but this one was the most straightforward or easy answer I could ever give, and the hat gives it away. It's Steve Kerr by a million miles. I adore him. I absolutely adore him. Again, I spoke about Ancelotti being my soccer, one that I draw most parallels to. If I was just to go for a coach overall, it'd be Steve Kerr without a doubt. I adore everything about him, his communication, his relationship with players, the fact that he has no problem bouncing between media and sport. He is, and I've made efforts. I spoke about, it took me a long time to get Connacht to say yes. It's taken me even longer to try and even figure out how to get to Kerr, but I have done a lot of digging, and I'm getting a little bit closer to at least trying to speak to somebody of importance in that direction. But yeah, I'd give and have a chat with him or a pint with him or a meal with him or whatever. Yeah.
Final question before I let you go, and if you were prepping for this one, I'm expecting a good answer. If your life was a book, Shane, what chapter would this be called?
Yeah, I don't know. Probably the only way I could think of it was Laois GAA year one. I'm in a job. It's my first year in it. It's a job that I hope to be in for the next 10 plus years. It's an incredible role to be in that I get up every day, and I think, I have an opportunity to make a massive difference in an area that is of one of the most important areas in my life. And I can't probably express how much I enjoy that. And it is year one, and it's very, very much a learning curve. But, as you say, if you're 30 years down the line, looking back, I think this is hopefully the beginning of something. Again, legacy sounds fierce, kind of egomaniac kind of stuff. But when I'm finished here, I want to be able to walk away and people say, Jesus, he did a good job, and here's where we were when he came into it, and here's where he was when we left. So yeah, that's probably the chapter that I'm just starting at the moment, Orla.
Okay, very good. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave all your links in the description box below. Where is the best place if someone wants to get in touch and chat all things coaching or bounce ideas off you?
Oh, Jesus, what is my Twitter handle? Hold on, now I'm opening my phone here as I'm talking to you. I am a Twitterite, all right, I must admit. It is at Shane, Shane, Keegan, Keegan, 81.
Perfect, very good. I'll leave it in the description box below. But Shane, thanks so much for your time. Best of luck with the rest of the league playoffs and everything in between. And thanks again for your time. Really appreciate it.
Cheers, Orla.
A big thank you to Shane for joining me on today's episode. I'll be sure to leave a link to all of his social media and his podcast, How to Win at Domino's, which is available on the 42 in the description box of this episode. If you are enjoying listening to this podcast, please do consider leaving a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts, as it does help the show grow. You can follow our social media at The Sideline Live on all social media channels. And as always, thank you so much for listening.